Now let's consider the next thing that might go if we don't have free will: accountability. If people don't have free will, they're not morally responsible. And so it seems we can't hold them accountable. Pereboom, interestingly, thinks that free will is a prerequisite for a particular type of accountability. And this is one that involves what he calls basic desert. So he thinks that when we praise or blame people for what they do, we presuppose that they deserve it in some basic sense. And the basic sense he means is that they do something knowingly and there's no further justification for praising or blaming them. So here the thought is that, if you act freely and you know what you're doing, then we have a justification purely on that basis for praising and blaming you. And we can hold you to account in that sense just because you've freely and knowingly done something. But here the relevant point is that this kind of basic desert justification, on praising and blaming requires that we have free will. So if we don't have free will, we no longer have justification for praising and blaming people with this justification. If we were to do so, we'd need some other justification. So Pereboom's point might seem quite radical. He thinks that any practice, any attitude that we might have that might require a basic desert justification has to be discarded. We can't have it anymore. So this is going to imply that we can't have moral anger, can't have indignation, resentment, praise, gratitude, guilt, all these kind of emotional reactions that we often have to people. Pereboom thinks presuppose a basic desert justification. When we're angry at somebody or indignant or we feel gratitude, we're presupposing that that person acted freely and knowingly did what they did. And so we praise or blame them or engage in these emotions just because a person is freely and knowingly acted as they did. Without free will, we have no justification for these attitudes. But even though we can't hold people responsible in this basic desert sense, and we can't praise or blame them with this basic desert justification, Pereboom doesn't think that we lack any justification for holding people accountable. In fact, he says, well, hang on a minute, hang on. We might lack free will, which means that we lack the justification for a particular type of accountability. But there are other types of accountability, he thinks, we do have justification for. And one type of accountability is what he calls rational accountability. So when we hold people rationally accountable, we're sort of holding them to account for not acting on their best reason. So if a person has a number of reasons to act, and some are better and worse, and then they choose to act on a less good reason, then we can still say to that person, well, why did you act on this bad reason? You had better reasons to act. Why didn't you act on it? So for example, we might suppose that a friend steals from us, and we might think this is a bad thing that they could have done. They had other reasons to act. They could have in fact not stolen from us, or in fact used that time to give money to charity. So while Pereboom thinks that we can't get angry at that person, we can't scold them, we can't be indignant with them, can't just be angry at them, we can still say, well, why did you act that way? Why did you steal from me? You had other things you could have done. This wasn't the best reason you could have acted for. Like, why did you do that? So Pereboom thinks we can still ask for explanations from people. We can still hold them to account and expect to answer what they've done. We just can't get angry with them in the process. That's not justified. And the justification that Pereboom points out is that we have a strong interest in getting people to act on their best reasons. We really want them to act as best they can. And if we hold them rationally accountable, we might encourage them to do so. And we might then improve other people's behavior. In a way, this is not dissimilar to how we hold young children responsible. So young children might not be responsible for what they do, they might not act freely, but we might still ask them for justifications for what they did. We might still ask them to explain why they acted as they did. If a young child steals something, you say, well, why did you do that? Can you give me a reason? Can you explain why? And in explaining why, we might get them to see that that's not a good reason to act for, and that they have better reasons available to them, and they can behave in a better way in future. Per Boom is still allowing that we have this kind of accountability in a world without free will. So ultimately, the justification here is moral improvement. It's worth noting here that, in a way, Per Boom is allowing that there's a kind of moral responsibility. So his free will skepticism, his hard incompatibilism, says that, no one acts freely and no one's morally responsible. It's true in one sense. No one acts freely on his view, and no one's morally responsible according to one type of moral responsibility. But Per Boom is craftily leaving open that there are other types of responsibility. And here you might say, well, the basic desert justification is a backward-looking form of responsibility. To be backward-looking means that it looks back on what's happened and it takes its justification just from what's happened. His kind of responsibility is rather a more sort of forward-looking one. It's one that looks towards the future. It looks to improvement, making things better. We still hold people rationally accountable because of what they've done, but we also justify holding them accountable by thinking about how we can improve them. But oddly, Per Boom thinks that we can't justify praise and blame and other associated emotions this way. And his reason is that, well, that would be unfair. That would be unfair to do that if we did that. They wouldn't deserve such treatment. But what's odd about his view here is that, if you're taking a forward-looking justification, if your justification is that you want to morally improve people, then why can't we just get angry at people? Why can't we scold them? Why can't we be upset with them? And so on. These might also be ways of encouraging them to morally improve themselves. If you know somebody's going to get really angry, unless you improve your behavior, then you might not improve your behavior. So one thing that strikes me as mysterious about Per Boom's account is why he thinks we can still sort of morally encourage and admonish people, as he puts it, but we can't praise and blame them. If praising and blaming is unfair, why is moral encouragement and admonishment? And if we think it's fair to morally encourage and admonish people, then why can't it also be fair to praise and blame them, to get angry with them, to feel gratitude? We wouldn't have a basic desert justification, that's true. But as Per Boom's allowing that we don't need one, we can have a forward-looking justification.